I'm chair of the St. Mary's School District trustees, at least until July, when I plan on retiring. I planned on retiring this year, but it was a bad year to do that. In light of everything going on and 3 brand new board members, a brand new superintendent, I thought it was pretty bad even for me to just say, gotta go now. So I said, okay, I can do this for 1 more year, but I'm feeling very confident that people will do just fine. And so one of the problems with the legislation, as I was saying before, was input. And I see nothing wrong with saying we as a state are broke. So please don't misunderstand me. I can read a budget. I know where we are. My problem came with calling it Students Come First. Truthfully, if you wanted to label it, it's Idaho's broke, we need to make cuts. And that's what it should have been called. And I think the public and everybody else, while that sounds really depressing, would have embraced that and said, and I mean teachers, I mean custodians, I mean parents, would have jumped on board and said, oh my gosh, we need to do what we can to help schools survive. But instead, calling it Students Come First, it makes it look like it is somehow the noble thing to do. There was probably nothing noble, in my opinion, about any of this legislation. They were backed into a corner, and they did a knee-jerk reaction, which and so the big problem with it was, even though there was a lot of talk that they got input, the input was never received. And I think the light came on for me last year when I went down to Boise for Day on the Hill in February. That's when we go as a school board to give testimony. And we were asked directly by a number of Democrats and Republicans, did you have any input into any of, why are you acting surprised? Did you not see this coming? And you don't want to look like a sore loser, but the truthful answer was no. We were not asked for our input. Had we been asked, maybe some of the things would be there, but they would look differently, or we'd be able to. And a lot of this is also being done in the name of local control. Now, I'm all for local control. I think local school boards, not just because I'm on one, but because I see the health of the school district, need to have control. Because like I said, what fits us doesn't fit Bonners Ferry. What fits us doesn't fit Boise, and vice versa. So each school district really has their own agendas and their own needs, their own public, their own community, and their own teachers to deal with. And so the idea of local control, anytime, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, and you offer that up to me, I like. But what they did was, and I'm trying to find a way to put this, they slashed the budgets so deeply and said, okay, here's your pot of money. Now we're going to take away some of your line item so you can decide what to do. Now here's your local control. And what it amounted to most school board people I've talked to through the state, and I was just last week where there were 500 of us in a room, is they said, here's your pot of money. Now here's your local control. You do the hard work. The stuff that people jump up at meetings and are upset about, or parents get teary-eyed about, or teachers get teary-eyed about. So that was the extent of the local control. Not local control as far as how will this impact a school this size versus this size. How will this impact a rural school versus an urban school? But we're cutting you down to the bare minimum. Now you figure out what to do with the money, or without entering. And so they call it something else. We were able, though, for input. You know, this started out with 6 classes. It's down to 2. Now, I love technology. I think technology is important, and I can guarantee you there isn't a teacher at the St. Mary's School District who doesn't believe it as well. They know that's the direction everyone's going, and if we put it in their hands, they will blossom. They do fine. The problem comes when you're talking about technology. You have to understand why they're doing it. It wasn't a pure thought. Let me put it that way. Like, if we put technology in the hands of our teachers, in the hands of our students, we will have Idaho students ready to hit the ground when they graduate. What they did is they did it thinking that it will replace a teacher. And there's where them and me part ways.
Okay, in northern Idaho, in different spots of Idaho, there's places where they can't get any internet service at people's homes, unless it's satellite that costs $69, $89, $99 a month. How do they expect these students to do their homework on a computer? Do they have to stay at school for 12 hours a day to be able to do that? I mean, because there's a lot of places like that.
We don't know what that's going to look like.
Boise has all that technology. And so
actually, they don't. There are parts of that area where the kids are just as lost as our upriver kids are. When we first started this process, our broadband in St. Mary's was so poor that if the high school students were logged on for a history class, and heaven forbid the district office was doing something, it brought down the middle school and grade school. We didn't have the broadband to cover it. We had been promised it, but it didn't happen. So again, how are you going to get these students? Now, I just heard a speaker from Oregon who said they started giving kids in the school district he lived at iPads in 3rd grade. And they thought, let's see what happens. They got them from a grant. Now these same kids are in the 5th grade. Their scores are really going up. The teachers are way happy. And the parents are behind it. But they're having to get money from different places to do it. And one of the questions that came up is, do they take them home? And the answer is, on this particular case, no, they don't. You know, all the work is done at school. And for a grade school kid, I could see, you know, my grade school, when one of my grandchildren was in grade school, half the time things were falling. You could follow the trail of him coming from Hayburn to Grandma's. It was like Hansel and Gretel. Let's go find where all your notes are. So I truly don't believe that giving them a laptop would have been the answer.
Are these kids smart? Yes.
You know, these kids are growing up in a digital age. Is it important that we have technology? I'll answer your question, Cheryl, but I have to tell you about something that came over my news link this morning from school districts about where we're going with the technology.
Okay. My question was, it sounds like you're saying that they started with, we'll just give them the computer instead of, do we have the resources to even support this?
Anytime money is the reason you're doing something, and money's real, I understand it, but anytime that's the fodder for what's going on, you are not going to think things through. And the thought was, and see, they aren't really giving us extra money. They've taken the money from our already limited budget and said, you're going to use this much for technology. There is no way anyone in this district is going to say it's okay to put a bunch of kids in a class, maybe seniors, I don't know. But what happens when a kid has a question? You know, you still have to have somebody in that classroom, or you are negligent as far as I'm concerned, for a lot of reasons.
Well, isn't one problem is they've sort of made it one size fits all?
Again, we're right back to no local control. There is no such thing as one size fits all. The same thing with some of the new transportation legislation that came through and how much they've cut on how much they reimburse for transportation. The miles we put on in St. Mary's are astronomical. And for Boise to cut back a route, these kids can take a city bus. It doesn't happen here. Look, the legislation has passed. We can't dig our heels in at this point. We have to be positive and do what the legislation says the best way we can for our community. And it may not always be pretty, but we need to move forward knowing that in 2012, the public is going to decide whether any of this is valid or none of it's valid. I mean, but we can't stop education till a year from now. We have to move forward, and I think we're trying to be positive. There are things, some nagging things in the back of my mind, but you know, in all truthfulness, our job right now is to make sure that every child gets an education in Idaho and every teacher has a chance to teach right in our own little neck of the woods. I can't, right now, my global view has slimmed quite a bit to just us because of money and because of having to move forward regardless of what else is going on around us.
Well, wasn't one of the problems with this legislation that it didn't surface until after the last election? What was promised in the election was quite different than the program that was presented, and it was presented without a lot of input from most of the stakeholders.
The stakeholders, including parents, as I said before, superintendents, teachers union, and school board, when we went to Boise and were asked point blank in February, well, weren't you part of this? And the answer was, truthfully, I hated to do it, but no. Part of the problem was, I don't know if promises were made before the election, because I was on a number of committees and I don't remember anything being promised to us. However, I also don't remember some of this stuff coming up. What I do worry about, though, is Ralph makes a good point. Maybe we should all tell the technology group what we would like to see. But the problem is with that is I think those contracts are already signed and ready to go. I think they have been since before the election, and rumor has it, and I certainly am not, you know, in the in crowd, that it is an out-of-state company to begin with, and that those contracts are already ready to roll. They were ready to roll long before the legislation came out. If that's true, we have a bigger problem in Idaho than whether or not we have money for technology. If that's true, we have a problem. We have a problem of citizenship. We have a problem of ethics and moral compass. If that turns out to be true, then we have a problem. But if we as citizens don't stand up and demand answers, we won't get them. And, you know, there's another part of the legislation that is, you know, and not all of the legislation I disagreed with. There were pieces of it that I thought were important. And while there are parts of the teachers union that haven't agreed with me on this, we've agreed to disagree, and, you know, they know I respect them, and I truly think they respect me. One of them was when I started on the board many, many years ago, I asked right then, why are we not doing negotiations in public? What is the problem here? Well, you just don't, it's not done. And in the 70s, in the 80s, there was a lot of bad behavior on both sides, and maybe it was better it was done in private. But we've come a long way since then, and I think having these things held in public, it is not the school board's money. It is not the superintendent's money, and it certainly isn't the teacher's money. It's the taxpayer's money, which, by the way, puts a lot of us with two hats to wear. But there's nothing wrong with having this in public. It keeps us all possibly a bit more above board and honest. And I have had reports from people that used to teach here that served on the board with me that there were times when there were some things done by school boards in the 70s and possibly into the 80s where, you know, not everything was above board. So maybe if they'd have been done in public in the first place. This new transparency law is also something I like. Causes a lot of work and a little bit more money, but we now have to post our budgets. We now have to post, and this part I have trouble with, every check we write. Of course, I don't know how we're going to have enough staff to do that, but the transparency part is important. I think the taxpayers need to, I'd like to see the city council start having a transparency act, and county, everybody, you know, where people could go on and read how much you spent for toilet paper. Nobody has a better right to know that than the people in this room that pay taxes. Nobody.